All right, today we're going to learn how to write our equations, our sine function and our cosine function. Given the words for our amplitude, given our words for our period, given the phase shift, given the midline, given the amplitude, given these parts that we were taking from the equation, now we're going to write the equation to do it. Now, I created a chart to make it much easier. Now, going through the chart, we have our amplitude. Remember, we're going to have a trig function. We're only going to be talking right now about making sine or cosine functions. We have our omega. Now, when we found omega before, we were always talking about our period equals 2 pi over omega. Now, this time we need to put omega into our equation, so we're going to solve this equation for omega, which would give us omega equals 2 pi over the period. And the period here is just abbreviated as PD. Now, we talked about our variable as being theta in this class. Now, to find our phi, okay, we always took, okay, that went with our phase shift. And our phase shift was negative phi divided by omega. Well, solving that for phi will give us phi equals our negative phase shift times omega, and you see that's what we have written up here. Now our midline is like a y equals 0, a y equals 2. They're that point on the y-axis that's going to give us our midline. Now, looking at number 1. We want to write our equation here. It says that the sine function, so we want to graph the sine function. So our trig function would be the sine. We're going to have our theta, and we're going to have our y equals. Now, what we want to look at is through our question of number 1 here, we need to pull out the information. Now, going systematically through it, what is our amplitude? Well, our amplitude, it says, is 3. So our amplitude is 3. Then it tells us our period is 2 pi. So PD equals 2 pi. Well, if we look up there, our period is part of our omega formula. So we need to solve for omega, which is 2 pi, divided by our period, which is 2 pi. 2 pi divided by 2 pi is 1. So our omega is 1. Now, keep going through it. It says we have a phase shift. A phase shift of left 3 units. So that's going to be negative 3 for our phase shift. Now, we need to put that in terms of phi. So phi tells us that we're going to have our negative phase shift, which is negative 3, times our omega value. Our omega value is 1. So we have 1 there. So our omega value is 1, so we plug in our 1. Now, solving through it, we're going to get phi equals negative times a negative gives us a positive 3 times 1, which is 3. So we put up here that our phi is going to be positive 3. Now, we look through there and we see our midline is at 0, so we do not have a vertical shift. So, looking up above. Now, where does our parentheses go? Remember, our parentheses was everything inside. Our vertical shift was outside. So, writing our equation here, we are going to have y equals 3 sine parentheses 1 times theta would just be theta plus 3. And that would be writing our equation here for number 1. So taking this equation would give us our answer here. Now, great job with this problem. Now, let's look at number 2. Number 2 says we have a cosine function. So we're going to take the cosine, our theta stays theta, and we're going to have y equals. Now, let's look here. It says our amplitude is 1. It says our period is pi, but that doesn't go in here because period is there. So we need to go down to our paper and solve for omega. So it's going to be 2 pi divided by our period, which is pi. So our pi's cancel out, and we're left with omega equals 2. So we're going to have a 2 there. Now we look and we see that we have a phase shift of right pi units. Now right pi units means it's going to be pi, and it's going to be positive, because if we move to the right of our x-axis from our origin, that's going to be in a positive direction. So we need to solve for phi. Phi equals, because we have our equation here that has our phase shift in it. It says negative phase shift times omega. So we have negative, our phase shift is pi. Jumping back here and getting our omega, which is 2. That'll give us a phi of negative 2 pi. So for phi, we get negative 2 pi. Now here it says that our midline is y equals 4. Well, that means we want 1, 2, 3, 4 on our y-axis. So that means we're up 4, so that's plus 4. Now, remember that from omega to phi gives us our parentheses. So if I scroll down just a little bit so I can give myself a little bit more room to work, I'm going to have y equals 1 times cosine, so that's cosine, parentheses 2 theta minus 2 pi plus 4. And that gives me my final answer. Now, let's look at number 3, cosine function. So, we're going to want the cosine function out of the 2 to choose from. We have our theta, that stays there. Go ahead and write in my parentheses so I know that all of that's going to be in my parentheses. Now, it doesn't say amplitude this time. It tells me that I have a maximum and minimum points. So, we need to do a little scratch work here and figure out where exactly our midline is going to be. So it tells me my maximum point is 1, 2, 3, 4. My minimum point is at 1, 2, 3, 4 at negative 4. So that was our maximum and our minimum point. Well, where's the middle between positive and negative 4? Well, the middle in between is at y equals 0. So our midline then is y equals 0. Well, how far do we go above and below that midline? Well, we went up 4 and we went down 4. So our amplitude is 4. Now, looking through the next step, if it says that we have a vertical reflection says that what we're going to have is in front of our trig function is going to put a negative sign. So that would make it, in this case, a negative cosine. So our reflection is going to put a negative sign in front of 4, in front of our amplitude. Now it tells us our period is 4 pi. Well, period goes with omega, so omega equals 2 pi divided by our 4 here. So it's going to be 2 pi divided by 4 pi. The pi's will cancel out, and 2 divided by 4 is 1/2. So our omega is 1/2. Now it says we have no phase shift, so we won't have anything in there for phi. So writing our final equation here, taking out each little part, we will have y equals negative 4 cosine, parentheses, 1/2 theta. And that'll be our final answer here. Now let's look at number 4. Number 4 says that we have the sine function. So since we have a sine function, we're going to take sine. Our variable is theta. Now, here it tells us that we have a maximum point. Now, we've got to figure out what exactly does this mean. So I'm going to scroll down. So all of this maximum point, I'm going to draw a little picture here. So it tells me I have a minimum value down at -2 and a maximum value at 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now I'm going to take my line here and extend it up a little bit more so that I can make sure it goes 10 units. Now, well, where's the middle between here? Well, I know from here to here I went a length of 10. From here to here I went a length of 2. So adding both of those together gives me a total length of 12 from 10 to -2. So taking 12 and dividing it by 2 to find the middle, we want to find the middle here, so that would be 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And if I went up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I would land at the same spot. Well, that spot gives me my midline. So my midline would be y equals 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's go ahead and label that up top. So my midline is y equals 4. Well, that's a positive 4. So now what was my amplitude? What distance did I go above and below 4? Well, that was a distance of 6 up and 6 down. So my amplitude will be 6. So now it says, what is my period? My period is 8 pi. Well, period goes with my omega, so that tells me omega equals 2 pi divided by 8 pi. So my pi's cancel out, and 2 divided by 8 is 1/4. So omega is 1/4. It does tell me I have a phase shift. My phase shift is left pi/4. So my phase shift is -4 pi because if I go in a left direction, that is in a negative direction. So my phase shift goes with phi. So phi equals negative my phase shift times omega. So my phase shift and omega. Well, my phase shift is -4 pi. And my omega here is 1/4. So multiplying it all together, a negative times a negative gives me a positive, so I have 4 pi times 1/4, which just leaves me with pi. Now remember, my omega and my phi are all in parentheses, and that is a positive pi. So when I write my equation, I'm going to have y equals 6 sine 1/4 theta plus pi, in parentheses, plus 4. So everything I have written here that I'm going to highlight is my final answer. So y equals sine, parentheses, 1/4 theta plus pi, in parentheses, plus 4. That is my final answer.